The explosion that finally unleashed the last remnants of its essence left only fragments of dust drifting through space. It was hard to even believe that just a few years ago, the planet, now nothing but a memory, had teemed with life. Green forests, blue skies, cities filled with the hum of people. Now all that remained were ruins, burning wreckage, and ash scattered by every passing wind. Alexander stood next to the massive spacecraft that had just landed on the red surface of Mars. He felt no thrill in being part of history, part of the aftermath of Earth's destruction. Mars was only a new beginning for humanity, a beginning that promised no ease or comfort. The first thing he saw after stepping out of the ship was Mars' sky, dark, unforgiving, and devoid of any hint of color. This was a planet that had always concealed its brutality. Earth, even in its death throes, had at least offered a glimmer of hope. Mars, however, had nothing to give. The colony, which had only just begun to establish itself, contained only a few hundred souls. They were the new inhabitants of a world that promised nothing but hardship. And yet, despite the dire circumstances, this was home now. A new home for those who had survived. But some of them had already forgotten what it meant to belong somewhere. "Alexander, you won't be standing here forever. Join the others, they've already started working," came a voice from behind him. It was Karina, one of the colony's scientists. She had been with the group from the beginning, studying the Martian soil and atmosphere. A sharp, practical woman, she had her hands full with the colony's efforts to survive. Alexander nodded, his thoughts still with Earth, as he turned toward the worksite where the others had gathered. The colony was small, fragile, and on the brink of collapse. There were no guarantees here. The technology to survive on Mars was barely adequate, and they were facing not just the struggle to adapt to an alien world, but the dark remnants of humanity's mistakes. As they walked toward the others, Karina glanced at him, noting his faraway gaze. "You know, it won't get any easier," she said, her voice softening. "But this is it now. We don't have a choice." Alexander only nodded again, his face hardening with the realization. This wasn't just a new beginning. It was survival. Exiled to the harsh and desolate surface of Mars, she had become a part of the planet in ways the others never would. To the people of the colony, she was an outsider, someone who didn't fit in, someone who had been cast aside for reasons that no one cared to understand. It was easier to forget her than to question the injustices she had suffered. But on Mars, that was her reality. She had spent the last few years surviving alone, scavenging what remained of the old research stations, the abandoned settlements, and whatever resources the planet begrudgingly offered. The people from Earth had arrived, and they had tried to create a new home, but their efforts felt like nothing more than a fragile attempt to outrun the inevitable. They were colonizing a world that had no intention of letting them thrive. Mars had a way of swallowing people whole, both physically and emotionally. Leah had no family left. No friends. Her exile had been a punishment, not for a crime she had committed, but for one she had been falsely accused of. She had never been given a chance to explain herself. And so, she had been abandoned, left to survive on her own, far away from any semblance of society. It was the only life she knew now. Today, like every other day, she was out scavenging. The wind howled across the barren terrain, carrying with it the red dust that seemed to get into everything. It settled in her hair, in her eyes, in her lungs. But it was part of her life now. Mars was a harsh, unforgiving planet, and it didn't care about how she felt. The only thing that mattered was that she kept moving, kept fighting for survival. As she walked through the wreckage of an old Martian base, she heard something, a distant hum, faint but unmistakable. At first, she thought it was the wind, but then the sound grew louder. She froze. The hum was a ship, someone was coming. Someone from the colony, or maybe something worse. With practiced speed, she ducked behind a pile of debris, her heart racing. She didn't want to be seen. She couldn't afford to draw attention to herself. Not when she had spent so much time staying hidden from them all. The ship came closer, its engines roaring as it descended toward the surface. Leah's pulse quickened. She could hear voices now, a group of people disembarking. They were looking for something, or someone. It wasn't long before one of them appeared in her line of sight. A man. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and a grim expression on his face. He wasn't one of the usual colonists. He was new. He seemed different somehow. More intense. And for a brief moment, their eyes met. Leah tensed. She didn't know whether to stay hidden or to run. But before she could make a decision, he looked away, scanning the surrounding area. He wasn't looking for her. For the first time in a long while, she felt a strange pull inside her, a feeling she had long since buried under the weight of survival. But she quickly dismissed it. It didn't matter who he was or why he was here. She had no business with the colonists. She had learned long ago that the less she interacted with them, the better. She turned and quietly slipped away, disappearing into the Martian landscape as the man continued his search. The wind blew harder now, as if Mars itself was reminding her of the cold, lonely life she had chosen. But something about the stranger stayed with her. There was something in his eyes, something that had made her heart race. It had been days since Alexander first arrived on Mars, but every new day felt like a new challenge. The colony was struggling to establish itself, making temporary settlements, growing food in synthetic greenhouses, and scavenging for resources. But despite the colonists' best efforts, the planet felt alien. Nothing about Mars was welcoming. It was a constant battle against the environment, a battle to survive. And yet, it was in this struggle that Alexander found himself yearning for something more than just survival. The weight of Earth's destruction still hung over him like a shadow, and he often found himself thinking about the life they had all left behind. But those thoughts were fleeting. The reality of Mars was too harsh to indulge in nostalgia. He was out with a small reconnaissance group, heading toward one of the old Martian research stations. The mission was simple: gather data and check for any remaining supplies that could be used by the colony. But as they moved through the desolate landscape, Alexander's mind kept drifting. It wasn't long before he noticed something. There, in the distance, a figure, standing tall against the endless red horizon. At first, he thought it was a mirage, but as they drew closer, it became clear: a person, alone, standing in the middle of nowhere. The group came to a halt. "Who the hell is that?" one of the colonists whispered. Alexander didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the figure. It was a woman, dressed in weathered gear, with a hood that shadowed most of her face. She didn't move. Didn't flinch. The others began to talk, speculating about who she could be. "One of the exiles, maybe?" someone suggested. Alexander felt an instinctive pull in his chest, a strange, unsettling feeling. There was something about her, something familiar, though he couldn't place it. "Stay alert," he ordered, his voice cutting through the chatter. "Let's approach slowly." As they approached, the woman seemed to notice them. She didn't run, didn't attempt to hide. Instead, she stood perfectly still, as if waiting for them to make the first move. Alexander took a few cautious steps forward, his boots crunching on the Martian soil. His hand hovered near the sidearm on his belt, just in case. He didn't know who she was, but he couldn't afford to take any chances. "Hey," he called out, his voice loud enough to carry across the distance. "Are you with the colony?" "We're here to help." The woman didn't respond immediately. Her eyes, cold and distant, remained fixed on him. For a moment, Alexander thought she might not speak at all. Then, finally, her voice broke the silence, rough and strained. "I'm not one of you," she said flatly. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Alexander frowned. "Then who are you?" he asked, stepping closer, his curiosity piqued. The woman shifted slightly, as if weighing her options. She was an enigma, her presence like a puzzle he couldn't solve. "I'm just trying to survive," she said, her eyes narrowing. "Like everyone else." Survival. The word resonated with Alexander. It was all they had now. Earth was gone, and survival was all that mattered. He studied her closely, the tension between them thickening with each passing second. Her posture, her demeanor, it was clear she didn't trust him, and in turn, he didn't fully trust her either. But there was something about her, something that drew him in. "I'm Alexander," he said, his voice softer now, trying to break through her defenses. "We're setting up a colony here. It's not much, but it's a start." She didn't respond to that. Instead, her gaze flicked toward the group of colonists, and for the first time, Alexander saw the hint of a frown tug at the corners of her lips. "Colony," she muttered under her breath, as if the word itself tasted bitter. "More like a prison." He couldn't help but feel the sting of her words. The colony wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was all they had left. "You're alone here," he said after a pause, his voice gentle. "You don't have to be." Her eyes met his again, and for a moment, he thought he saw something soften in them. A flicker of vulnerability, quickly masked. "I don't belong with your kind," she said quietly, looking away. Alexander wasn't sure what to say to that. He didn't know what had happened to her, why she was out here alone, or why she seemed so determined to push him and the colony away. But he knew one thing for sure. There was something in her, something fierce, something resilient, that reminded him of everything they had lost. And maybe, just maybe, it was that same fire that could help them rebuild. "Take care of yourself," he said finally, turning away. "If you change your mind, you know where we are." And with that, he signaled for his group to move on. But as they left, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter wasn't over. The woman, the exile, would haunt his thoughts for a long time to come. The days on Mars were brutal. The planet had a way of stripping away all pretense, revealing only the raw, unyielding truth of survival. Every day felt like a fight, not just against the Martian elements, but against time itself. The colony, still fragile and tentative, struggled to establish any real foothold on the red planet. Supplies were dwindling, tensions were rising, and hope was starting to fray at the edges. Alexander had found himself out on more reconnaissance missions, leading small teams to search for resources, scout possible locations for expansion, and, most importantly, defend what little they had from the native Martians. The Martians were not just a myth or a rumor, they were real. And they were angry. The first skirmish had been quick, violent, and terrifying. No one had expected the creatures, if they could even be called creatures, of Mars to be so advanced, so relentless. They weren't the typical alien invaders you saw in the old Earth stories. They were more like shadows, quick and silent, with an intelligence that seemed far beyond what humanity had expected. Mars, it seemed, had its own hidden history. On this particular mission, Alexander was once again leading a small team. The colony's supplies were running low, and they needed a new water source. The Martian desert stretched out before them, a vast emptiness broken only by the occasional rock formation or ancient ruins. They had no idea what they would find in the desert, but it was their only hope. As they moved deeper into the barren land, Alexander couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The Martians were out there, somewhere, hidden in the rocks and the dust, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Stay alert," he ordered, his voice low. The others nodded silently, each of them scanning the desolate landscape. Suddenly, the stillness of the Martian desert was broken by a sharp, guttural sound, like a growl or a roar. A shiver ran down Alexander's spine. The Martians were close. "Get ready," he whispered, unslinging his rifle and scanning the horizon. The first creature appeared almost out of nowhere. It was tall, thin, and almost translucent in the harsh light of Mars. Its skin shimmered in the sunlight, like liquid metal, reflecting the barren world around it. Its eyes, large and unblinking, locked onto Alexander, and a low, menacing hiss escaped from its mouth. Before anyone could react, the creature lunged forward, moving faster than human eyes could follow. The team opened fire, but the Martian's movements were too quick, its form shifting in the air like a shadow, dodging the bullets with ease. "Fall back!" Alexander shouted, already backing away. The team scattered, trying to find cover behind the jagged rocks and the ancient remnants of Martian ruins. The battle was a blur. The Martians were everywhere, more than one this time. They came at them from all angles, swift and brutal. It felt like they had no chance. In the chaos, Alexander heard something, a sound that didn't belong. A familiar voice, calling his name. He looked to his left and saw her. Leah. She was standing there, out in the open, her eyes focused on the fight. Without a second thought, Alexander bolted toward her. "What the hell are you doing?" he shouted, grabbing her arm and pulling her to cover. "Get down!" But she didn't move. Her gaze was fixed on the Martians, and there was something in her eyes, something fierce, something that told him she wasn't afraid. She was a fighter. "Get out of here, Alexander," she said, her voice cold. "This is my fight, too." "You're insane," he said, feeling the pressure of the situation bearing down on him. "You can't fight them alone." "I don't have a choice." She shot back, stepping forward, her eyes burning with determination. Before he could argue, the first Martian lunged at them, its clawed hand swiping through the air with lethal precision. In a flash, Leah moved. Her body was like liquid, flowing with practiced ease. She grabbed a nearby weapon, spun, and struck the Martian hard across the face, sending it crashing to the ground with a sickening thud. Alexander watched in awe as she moved with a grace he hadn't expected, her every motion calculated, deadly. "Get back!" she shouted, knocking another Martian off its feet with a well-placed blow. Without thinking, Alexander pulled his weapon and joined the fray. He couldn't let her fight alone, not now. The battle became a blur of motion, fire, and chaos. Every time a Martian fell, another seemed to take its place, as if they were endless. But together they fought, Liao with her wild, untamed skill, and Alexander with his military training. The fight dragged on, and slowly, they began to gain ground. The Martians were relentless, but the humans were not going down without a fight. When the last Martian finally fell, the dust settled. Alexander and Liao stood, panting, their bodies covered in sweat and dust, their clothes torn and bloodied. But the fight was over. For now. "You're not so bad," Alexander said, a smirk tugging at his lips as he wiped blood from his brow. Liao glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You're not so bad yourself," she replied, but there was no smile on her face. For a moment, there was silence between them. Then, as the wind howled across the Martian plains, Liao turned and began to walk away, disappearing into the dust. Alexander watched her go, his heart heavy with an unfamiliar feeling. The days after the battle were long and exhausting. The colony was recovering, but the Martians were relentless. Each skirmish left them more weary, their resources thinner, and their resolve shakier. Yet, Alexander couldn't shake the memory of Liao, the exile who had fought beside him with a ferocity he had never seen before. She wasn't like the others, distant and cautious. There was something raw about her, something untamed, as if Mars itself had shaped her into something stronger than any of them could understand. He had tried to find her after the battle. He wanted to talk, to understand why she fought so fiercely, why she had pushed him away in the first place. But she had disappeared, as always, into the vast Martian landscape, as though she was never meant to stay in one place for too long. It wasn't until days later, during another reconnaissance mission, that he saw her again. They were in the same area, and despite the growing tension with the Martians, Alexander felt compelled to find her. The planet felt different this time, quieter, like something was building beneath the surface. He could feel it in the air, the anticipation, the silent energy that seemed to hang over the colony and the Martian land. As he made his way to a small, abandoned settlement on the outskirts of their main colony, he saw her. She was standing by a broken-down structure, looking at the horizon. The sun was setting, casting the landscape in an eerie glow, as if Mars itself was holding its breath. He approached slowly, unsure of how she would respond. But she didn't move, didn't even acknowledge his presence. She was lost in thought, the silence between them stretching on until it became almost unbearable. "I've been looking for you," Alexander said finally, his voice cutting through the silence. She didn't turn to look at him, but her voice was calm, almost distant. "I'm not interested in talking," she said. "Not about the colony. Not about survival. I don't belong with any of you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. There was a sadness in her tone, a resignation that made him pause. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "You fought with us. You saved us. Why push us away?" Liao let out a slow breath, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Because I don't belong. Not with the colony. Not with any of you. You think survival is the answer. But it's not. We're all just running from the past, trying to find something that doesn't exist anymore." Alexander stepped closer, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "We're trying to build a future here. Mars isn't perfect, but it's the only chance we have left." She finally turned to face him, her eyes sharp and intense, but there was something else there, a vulnerability he hadn't seen before. "You don't get it," she said, her voice softer now. "Mars doesn't want us here. And you're all so busy trying to survive that you've forgotten that it's not just about living. It's about what we've lost. And what we're willing to sacrifice to keep going. I'm not interested in fighting for a future that might never come." He didn't know what to say. Her words made him feel like the ground beneath him had shifted. It was hard to deny the truth in what she said. They were fighting for survival, yes, but what did they lose in the process? Was this all they had left? A desperate scramble for a future that might never be? "You've already sacrificed so much," he said, his voice low. "Why keep running from it?" Because I don't know who I am anymore, she said quietly. I don't even know if I'm capable of being anything else. All I know is that Mars has made me who I am now. And maybe that's all I'll ever be. Alexander stood there, trying to understand her, but it was like trying to grasp smoke. She had been through so much, her life a series of battles both on and off the battlefield, and he knew there was no easy answer to the questions that haunted her. I don't think you're as lost as you believe, he said, his voice filled with a quiet certainty. She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. Maybe you're right. Or maybe I'm just trying to survive. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled around them, carrying the red dust of Mars into the air. The silence between them stretched on, but this time, it didn't feel like an obstacle. It felt like something else, a kind of understanding. I'm not giving up on this, he said finally, his voice steady. I believe in the future we can build. And if you change your mind, we could build it together. Her eyes softened for a moment, and then she turned away, walking toward the ruins of the settlement. Maybe, she said without looking back. But I'm not sure I'm ready for that yet. As she disappeared into the fading light, Alexander stood there, his heart heavy with the weight of her words. He didn't know what the future held for them, but he knew one thing: they weren't done yet. Not by a long shot. The days following their conversation were filled with tension. The Martian skies were clouded with both literal and figurative storms. The colony's resources continued to dwindle, and the conflict with the Martians only escalated. But for Alexander, the real battle wasn't against the Martians. It was against his own feelings. His thoughts were consumed by Leah, the exile who had become both an enigma and a source of unspoken longing. He couldn't forget her. No matter how hard he tried, her words, her defiance, and her raw strength haunted him. But he knew it wasn't just about him. It was about survival. Every choice they made had to be about the colony, about securing their future on a planet that wanted to swallow them whole. Despite this, he couldn't help but wonder, was it possible to have both survival and hope? Was there a future for him here, with her, amidst the endless battles for survival? The colony was preparing for another large-scale push, this time, to secure a stronger foothold near the Martian water sources. It was risky, but it was necessary. The Martians had been more aggressive lately, and their resistance was beginning to show signs of intelligence and coordination. This wasn't just an invasion anymore. It was a war they couldn't afford to lose. Alexander was suited up, ready for another day of fighting, when he saw her again, Leah. She wasn't part of the official mission, but she had a way of showing up when things mattered most. She stood near the edge of the camp, her eyes scanning the horizon, always alert. There was a strange mix of resolve and sadness in her expression, something that pulled at his heart. He walked toward her, his boots crunching on the dry Martian soil. She turned as he approached, and for a moment their eyes met. It felt like the weight of everything, the war, the colony, the sacrifices, hung in the balance between them. "Are you leaving?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm going to fight," he replied, his voice steady but heavy. "We don't have a choice. The colony needs me." She nodded, but there was something in her gaze, something uncertain, something vulnerable. She was waiting for him to say more, to do more. But what could he say? "Leah," he said, his voice softening. "This fight, it's not just about survival anymore. It's about everything we've lost, everything we still hope for. It's about rebuilding. And I want you to be a part of it." She looked away, her expression hardening again. "I don't belong there, Alexander. I never did. I'm not like you, or the others. You all have something I don't, something I can't even remember anymore." He took a step closer to her, his voice low but filled with conviction. "You're wrong. You have more than you think. And Mars, it doesn't define who you are." For a moment, she said nothing. Her eyes flickered toward the horizon, where the dark clouds of the coming storm were gathering. It was as if Mars itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next storm to break. Finally, she spoke, her voice quiet but strong. "I don't know if I can stay, Alexander. But I do know this. I don't want to lose what we have." His heart tightened in his chest as he looked at her, the intensity of the moment almost overwhelming. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out. This was it, the moment when he had to make a choice. A choice between duty and love, between the survival of the colony and the uncertain future with the woman who had captured his heart. Leah, he said again, this time more softly. You don't have to fight alone. We can rebuild. Together. But it's your choice. I can't do this without you. Her eyes softened, a flicker of hope breaking through the walls she had built around herself. She took a deep breath, as if weighing the decision that would change everything. I don't know what the future holds, she said, her voice trembling slightly. But maybe we can find it together. And with that, she reached out and took his hand. The silence between them was filled with an understanding, a connection that neither of them had expected. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be simple. But together, they would face the storm that was coming, not just from the Martians, but from the world they were building together. As they stood side by side, looking out at the red horizon, they knew that their battle was far from over. The Martians were still out there, the planet still hostile, and the future uncertain. But in that moment, there was hope. There was a chance, however small, that they could carve out a place for themselves on this foreign world. And maybe, just maybe, they could find love in the midst of the chaos.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. We've got plenty more stories coming your way.